Have you ever been caught out by buying a wishlist plant only to find out that it's dropped in price shortly afterwards, or maybe you felt buyer's remorse because of how much you've spent on a particular plant? This isn't uncommon, especially over the last 3 years where the houseplant market has gone through an extraordinary journey. We've seen houseplant prices reaching record levels for certain plants only to go through price crashes. So I've rounded up some of the ones that I'm aware of, some you will be aware of too, but it's extraordinary to see the prices that they have reached and what they are available for now. I'd love to know if you are aware of any others, so share them in the comments below, as I know that the prices for plants vary by availability and by country and region. Also, let me know if you've bought any of the plants that I cover in this video, and did you buy them at their top price, or did you wait and get them at a bargain price? So we know the pandemic had a massive impact on this. We were at home more, we wanted to improve our spaces, bring some greenery indoors, and that's where a lot of the new houseplant interest came from. That increase in interest then it increased the demand, which outstripped the supply, and that's generally why prices increase when the supply doesn't meet the demand. But that's not the only reason why the prices have increased, only to then drop. So there was an element of commercial opportunity here as well, so there were some plants that were readily available, but because of the perceived increased demand, sellers or growers realised that they could charge more for them and make more of a profit, and why not, they are running a business. So with that, some examples are the Pilea peperomioides, which again, very common house plant, was maybe $10 to $20 or pounds before the pandemic, but in the peak of the pandemic maybe hit around $50 or pounds. But then equally you've got the Philodendron Pink Princess, quite infamous for the prices that it reached and the demand for the plant, but again they were quite readily available, especially in certain countries where the prices weren't really that affected. Not just that, but also the influence of social media. So then we've got influencers sharing their houseplant collections, particularly the rarer or more desirable plants, how much they've paid for them, where they've got them from, and how good they look in their collection, a bit of plant flexing, and that in turn gives us a fear of missing out. We want to get those same plants in our collection, but because of that supply and demand issue, it makes them harder to get, and we play a silly psychological trick on ourselves, not just with plants, but with anything. When it's harder to get, we want it more, and therefore we're willing to pay more for it. That's why a lot of the plants reached record prices. A lot of the record prices were actually found on reseller sites, where individuals were selling either from wholesale or actually doing their own propagations and selling cuttings of them, where real huge record prices were found. So it's interesting just how social media has influenced us and our psychology to pay more for plants over the last 3 years too. So there are also many reasons as to why houseplant prices have been falling and why there have been price crashes with certain plants. Part of that is due to the increase in supply, so we've seen lots of houseplant shops opening in-store and online, making plants more accessible to us, therefore increasing that supply. We've also seen big box stores coming back to commercial opportunity, spotting the increase in demand and therefore getting in on that market. So that could be supermarkets, garden centres and homeware stores where they've increased their houseplant stock. As they are big stores, they have massive buying power, can buy the plants at lower prices and hopefully share some of those savings with the consumer. Then there's also new methods of propagating them or producing them. So one great example of this is the Monstera albo. So the reason that was in such low supply was because it had to be propagated in order to make sure that it had a stable variegation from a mother plant with the variegation. However, that obviously takes time, it takes a lot of resource from the plant. It means you need to have a stable mother plant to do that, and lots of them, in order to get lots of plants and make a profit. However, we now have, while it's not technically new, it is being used more, tissue culture, where growers can actually take cells of plants and produce hundreds if not thousands of plants from just a small amount of plant material. So it means they can be mass produced and therefore much less resource, much less cost, and hopefully those savings again come through onto the plant market and we can buy cheaper plants. And as I said, a lot of this started with the pandemic, so we were stuck at home, we wanted to make our spaces better, but now we're coming back to a new way of normal, or a new normal, where we're able to go outdoors, we're able to see friends, we're able to go back into the office. So a lot of people that have obviously built houseplant collections, when we are out and about and we're looking at plants, maybe we don't feel the need to add more plants to our homes, depending on how much of a houseplant enthusiast you are. I certainly do, but again, those that really got into it during the pandemic because they were stuck at home, maybe don't feel that need. Equally, if they're going into the office more, they're out and about more, if they've built a large houseplant collection, maybe they don't have the capacity to look after it, so therefore they're not buying more. But equally, I have read certain accounts of people selling off houseplants because they have such a large collection, they don't have the capacity to look after them. They're selling houseplants to make up room in the home, but equally to recoup some of the cost that they maybe spent during the pandemic when they bought the plants at their peak. So that has therefore lowered the demand and helped the supply catch up, and as a result made the houseplants, sort of the prices, level out a little bit more and make them more affordable. So it seems like a lot of the plants that had extortionate price increases and then price crashes were Monsteras and Philodendrons, with a few others added in there such as Syngoniums, Alocasias and Anthuriums. So on that note, we've got to start with the variegated Monstera or Monstera albo. This really kicked off the plant craze and was the influencer plant of choice at the start of the pandemic. They really shot up in price. People would do almost anything for them, so they were paying hundreds just for cuttings, and even paying £50 to £100 for things like wet sticks. So if you don't know, wet sticks are tiny pieces of stem with a leaf node on that have maybe a chance of propagation. I'm sure they do in the right conditions, but that's all they have, a small chance of propagation, and there's no guarantee that you're actually getting the plant that you're getting. If it happens to propagate, you'll only know you've got the right plant when it actually develops leaves, so it is a bit of a gamble, particularly for the high prices that Monstera albo wet sticks were going for. And unfortunately, not just with Monsteras, but with a lot of these plants that I talk about, because of the demand for them and people's, I guess, need for them, a lot of people were unfortunately scammed because people saw the opportunity, the scammers saw the opportunity to sell these different things, and people would buy them, unfortunately. So when it comes to the larger plant, even if cuttings were going for hundreds of pounds, so with the larger plants into the thousands, multiples of thousands. If you do want to get a Monstera now, depending on where you're from, but in the UK they're readily available, you can just go online, buy them, buy a small plant for £30 to £40, and it does depend on the level of variegation, as I mentioned, as to how much you pay, but if you wanted one in the collection with 3 to 5 leaves, you can get one quite easily now. So keeping with variegated Monsteras, we've got the Monstera adantini variegata, which I think had even more challenges with the demand and supply than the Monstera albo, and went for astronomical prices. So the larger plants went for thousands of pounds. I'll see again if I can get the record price on the screen for you, so you can see just how much it went for. And then also, even just 18 months ago, as I was checking out one of the wholesale websites from when I used to have the houseplant shop, they were selling them at wholesale for £300 for maybe 3 or 4 leaf plants, very small plants, to sell at retail for about £900, and that was only 18 months ago. So they have come down in price quite significantly since then, for the same sort of small plants, 3 to 4 leaves, for about £70 to a couple of £100 depending on where you buy them from. But again, you can see that massive price difference from thousands of pounds down to just 70 to a couple of hundred. And on a similar note, but not quite as extortionately priced as the previous one, we've got the Monstera adantini mint, and this one I don't think had the same supply and demand issues as the previous two, so it didn't go up as high in price, but it did still have a significant price crash. So when these were at their peak, they would be between £100 and £200, depending on where you got them from and the size of the plant, but now the cheapest I've seen them available is £12.99 in store and £13.99 online. So again, I'll see if I can show that on screen, just to show you just how much that price has dropped. Now, the Monstera adantini is often confused with the Monstera obliqua, although they are quite easily differentiated when you put them together, but that leads nicely on to our next plant, the Monstera obliqua Peru. So these just weren't commercially available when they were in their peak demand, which only fueled that demand further. And as I was doing the research for this, I did come across an account that said, and you may remember this too, if you have been collecting houseplants for a while, if you wanted an obliqua, you had to know someone that happened to have one in their collection to buy a propagation from, because they just weren't available on the market. And if they were for sale, they would have been from incredibly specialist rare houseplant sellers, or possibly from individuals that somehow had them in their collection and were selling either the whole plant or propagations, and as a result they were selling for thousands of pounds a plant. More recently though, only within the last few months, they've recently hit the market en masse, so they've been mass produced somehow, maybe tissue culture or some other mass production method, and they've hit the market at £35 to £40 a plant, which is amazing to go from being not available at all to thousands of pounds a plant to just £35 to £40, and really shows the impact that the increase in supply can have on those plant prices. So if I wanted an obliqua now, I can go online and find one readily available at a really affordable price, but hopefully that means they will become more available worldwide as well. So I've actually got my own example of this next one, and this is a Thai constellation, and I've only got this because it was at the right price and I snapped it up as a plant bargain. This is definitely an exception to the rule for the price I got this size plant for. However, when they were at their peak demand but lowest availability, they were selling for hundreds of pounds, if not thousands for larger plants, and even hundreds for cuttings. As the availability has increased, not just in terms of the number of plants, but the different sizes that are available now, so you can get small ones, medium ones, large ones, it's giving more accessibility to get them in your collection for less, and then if you're buying the smaller ones, you can help them grow to their full potential. So the smaller ones are maybe available at between £50 and £70, medium ones £100 to £250, and larger ones maybe up to £600. Really depends, they could be a bit more, really depends on where you're getting them from, the size of the plant, and the seller, of course, how much they want to profit from them, but also where you're from as well. So these are based on what I found in the UK. However, I have had conversations with individuals on the channel, actually in the comments, from the US that have found the prices haven't quite gone down as much there, although they are going down, so keep an eye on them. Now I don't have an example of this next one, although I do have this which is very similar. This is following on from the Monstera section, as this is commonly known as the Monstera minima, although it's the Rhaphidophora tetrasperma, and this one is the Rhaphidophora tetrasperma variegata. So this actually had a record-breaking price of 27,100 New Zealand dollars, or that equates to £14,000, with an online auction sale of one of these plants during the pandemic, which is a huge price, and actually any other plants that have been sold around that, depending on the size of them, of course, and the selling channel, have reached thousands of pounds for these variegated Rhaphidophora tetraspermas. However, looking at the prices now, you can actually buy them online, again quite readily available, for between £75 to £150. So again, a huge price decrease from those peak demand prices. So moving on to philodendrons, I've got to start with the philodendron pink princess, as this has been on a price roller coaster during the plant craze. So these were actually cheaper before the pandemic, and then they shot up in price. That commercial opportunity I was speaking about, maybe the demand did outstrip the supply and therefore increase the price further, and these were going for hundreds of pounds for a plant, depending on the size, and even hundreds of pounds for cuttings. So I did actually read one account when I was doing the research for the video of someone that spent £200 for a cutting of one of these, so no guarantee that it would even root. £200, a huge sum of money, and they immediately regretted it once they'd bought it. So that just goes to show the power of impulse and what we will do if we really want something and there's a demand for it, depending on, again, your own sensibilities. So these have dropped dramatically in price as the supply has increased as well. They're readily available and in lots of different sizes, so again, if you want to buy a smaller one, help it grow to its full potential, you can get them a lot cheaper. Even the larger ones are quite readily affordable as well. So small ones you can get for about £6 or £7.99 in the UK, so under £10, medium ones between £10 and £25 depending on the retailer, and then larger ones maybe 40 to 70, but they are much larger plants, which would have cost hundreds of pounds in the peak demand during the plant craze. So this next one is on my wish list. I'm very tempted to buy it for the new prices that it sells for, but I am holding out a little bit longer. So this is the Philodendron Florida Ghost, and just like with all the other variegated ones with these wonderful white leaves, was in high demand, and these I don't think went for as high as some of the really in demand ones, and now they have started to become available again in different sizes, just like the other plants. So you can buy small ones at a much lower price or larger ones at a higher price, but still much lower than what you would have paid previously. So they are available, the smaller ones available just for £10 to £30, and they are maybe the baby plants in the 6cm pots to grow to their full potential, and then the larger plants between 50 and 75. So still a significant saving on what they were when they first started to pick up demand. And on a similar note, this one's another Philodendron Florida, but this one is the Philodendron Florida Bronze, so it's got these wonderful deep bronze leaves, and this I feel has only been fairly recently on the market, maybe the last year or so. It might have been available for longer, but I've only seen it on the UK market for that sort of time frame. The cheapest I've seen it for was £128, and that was for a reasonable sized plant, but other than that, other retailers were selling them for about £180. However, in doing the research for this video, I've actually come across quite a lot of retailers selling a smaller version of the plant for £24.99, so a significant saving buying slightly smaller, as I've mentioned with some of the other plants, just to get it in the collection and then help it grow to a more mature plant. But equally, looking at the like-for-like size with the plant compared to that £128 or the £180 plants, they're now being sold for about £70 to £90. So again, a significant saving compared to the price they were just a year ago within the short space that they've been on the UK market, or at least that I've been aware of them being on the UK market. So I'd be really interested if you've got Florida Bronzes where you are from and what prices they sell for there. Now, I've brought this back for illustration purposes. This is the Philodendron Milana Chrysum, but I've also grouped it with the Philodendron Gloriosum as they've been on similar accessibility and pricing journeys. These, just looking at them, you can see how tropical and lush looking these leaves are, and just how much these would have impacted the demand for the plant when they were being shared on social media. I mean, this is only propagation, but imagine this as an established plant, just how wonderful this would look and how much that would have driven that demand. So at the time, during the plant craze, these would have been going for maybe a couple of £100, depending on the size of the plant, of course, and where you were getting them from, but hundreds of pounds, and with, or at least high tens for smaller plants. And with these now, they are much more readily available. You can buy them quite easily online and much cheaper. So just like the other plants that we mentioned earlier, you can get them in much smaller versions as well, again to add them to your collection for less. So the baby plants in 6cm pots between £6.99 and £8.99, and then going up maybe between £10 and £30 for a medium-sized plant, and then a bit more for the larger plant, but nowhere near the hundreds of pounds that you would have paid for them at the sort of peak of the plant craze. And even before the plant craze, I can't actually say I remember ever seeing these readily available. So I think it is partly that demand that has influenced the supply and made these more readily available too. So moving away from philodendrons to the Anthurium clarinervum, these ones haven't had the massive price differences as some of the earlier plants, but they have reduced quite significantly as their availability has increased. So these would go for hundreds of pounds, again depending on the size of the plant, or at least in the tens for the smaller plants. I remember looking for one of these during the height of the plant craze as well, and I could only find one, a very small one, for about £25, but all of the ones were much more expensive, into maybe £50–60 for the smaller plants, that is, not even the more established ones. So now you can actually buy the sort of medium-sized plants for between £20 and £40, and they are much more readily available and more static in that sort of price range. Equally, the larger plants that would have gone for hundreds of pounds, you can actually get for between 50 and 70 as well. So again, quite a price reduction and an increase in accessibility in terms of where you can buy them from, more places to buy them from. So as you can see from those examples, even some of the rarest plants and most expensive plants will eventually become more accessible and drop down in price, some more significantly than others. So if you've got anything on your wish list and you're waiting to buy something, be patient, keep waiting, and hopefully they will drop down in price. It's highly likely they will, and then you can get them at a price that's much more friendlier to your bank balance, and you'll be much happier with your purchase and your new plant in your collection. And another way to get new plants into your collection, and possibly special varieties, is by networking with other houseplant enthusiasts. So join online community groups, or maybe even if you've got them local to you where you can meet in person, then you can get involved in plant swaps, or even if they're selling plant propagations that maybe are different varieties that you don't have, possibly even ones that aren't readily available in your area. They've just been built up over time in that person's collection. So that's a great way to get new plants in your collection, possibly for less, and also build up that network of friendship with those other people with a similar interest. So out of those listed, which do you have in your houseplant collection, and did you buy them at the peak of their demand or wait until prices lowered? I'm working on a related project, so I'd love to hear examples from you of any other plants that have reduced in price since the plant craze and are now much lower. Share them in the comments below. If you have found this useful, then consider subscribing. I'll have new videos every week, usually on a Sunday or Monday. And I've got my previous video linked at the end on Rhaphidophora tetrasperma care if you'd like to watch that next. If you've got any questions, put them in the comments below and I'll respond to everyone. And as always, thank you for watching Grow Your Wellbeing.